Daryl Recommends Podcasts is a podcast recommending series and shouldn't be mistaken as a reviewing one. Opinions about each show are my own and should not reflect what each podcast has to offer. Content warnings aside, I believe if any recommendation in my series interests you, you should give it a chance, regardless of how I personally feel about the show.
My first mistake was thinking that I was a journalist, that I was simply observing a phenomenon from a safe distance, and that I wasn't going to get involved, like a biologist watching the lion take down the gazelle and letting nature take its course. I don't know why I thought that I, of all people, would be able to be party to this without becoming a participant. Hubris, maybe? It wouldn't be the first time that hubris has been my undoing. I'm not a journalist. I'm not a professional. I'm a shitty podcaster, at best. A hubristic, shitty podcaster. So I guess the least I can do is that, a shitty podcast. If you're hearing this, that's what I decided to do. I'm out here and, strangest of all, I'm in the lead. My name is Mike Walters, and I'm going to tell you everything I've figured out about the game WOE.BEGONE.
Mike Walters gets wrapped up in an ARG he is quick to learn is both violent and dangerous. As he progresses, what started only as a struggle for survival turns into a hubristic fight to claim the technology that makes all of this possible. This is WOE.BEGONE. Sorry, I had to do it. WOE.BEGONE is a sci-fi podcast that delves occasionally into mystery and horror. The story is narrative, mainly told by Mike Walters under the guise of being a podcast he is making about the ARG WOE.BEGONE. The podcast includes original soundtracks created by the creator of the show, Dylan Griggs. The show is driving me crazy! That's like all I can say, is the show drives me crazy. And it's a good way, I love it a lot. I don't mean to say it as in like the show upsets me, because it does not. The show is really good. I really enjoyed this a lot, and I'm so glad I listened to it, but the show drives me crazy. This show, just everything about this show is... I don't know how to explain it. I've been like trying to figure out how to explain this show to my friends for a while now, but it's very, very hard. Do you know how hard it is to talk about the cast of characters where half of the cast is the same 3 people? It is hard! The name of the show, when I originally first heard it, made me think it was a fantasy podcast. If you want to know like how this show has grabbed me by the throat and go like, we are not giving you an easy time with this thing. For some reason, I thought because of the name, it was a not a sci-fi fantasy podcast, just a fantasy podcast. But then I saw the like title little card that all the podcasts have, and I was like, this does not look like something you would use for a fantasy podcast. This looks more like a sci-fi thing, which it turns out it was. And not to go on my rant about how this show is like trying to put me into the hospital. But the show is really good. The show is great. I enjoyed this show a lot while listening to it, and I enjoyed theorizing with it, and I'm just, yes, the show is just, I keep saying the show is really good. I actually need to talk about the show, so let's go into it. As I said, the show starts off with about Mike Walters, who's decided to make a podcast about ARG called WOE.BEGONE. And he gets into it, and he has to start doing these like emotionally and physically harmful things to progress through the game, with the guys that his prize will be taken away from him. What's his prize? You find out in the first episode. But essentially it involves bringing back somebody from the dead, because this is a sci-fi podcast about time travel. And the plot goes from there, and it goes in all these different directions, while still somehow still keeping the ARG portion of the beginning of the show relevant, which I think is like really cool how they did it, because I feel like after a while an ARG where you have to go do all these violent and horrible things can't really last on its own that long. But I feel like that the show really paces that super well, keeping this ARG relevant without like sacrificing the plot to be like, oh, but we gotta remember the horrible ARG. And it's just really done. And the show is mostly just voiced by Mike Walters, the character, because Dylan Griggs is the narrator for it. about like midway through the show, season 7-ish, they introduce other voice actors for the characters, and they get such a good cast of people for this. Like if you love shows like Malevolent or the Siltverses, lots of people who voices like I recognize too, and I was just like, this is such a good cast for such a show that is like, it's horrible, it's emotionally devastating, it gets super violent, but it's just, the story is so good. It gets so interesting, and it's really great. How it balances its like levity with like all this horrible, serious stuff happening, and like its emotional beats aren't like beaten down by like the parts of it that get really comedic. Because the show is really silly for a show that says it takes place during COVID, progressing past after what we say is after COVID, but really is not. The only thing that spreads quicker than COVID in the show is becoming a cowboy. The show is like a virus when it comes to cowboys. Everybody who's in the show, if you are a character in WOBEGONE, eventually you're gonna become a cowboy. And there's just so much stuff that goes on. And it's not like, it's in the same vein of like Hello from the Hollowoods, where so much stuff is going on. However, unlike Hello from the Hollowoods, it kind of focuses just like mostly on just Mike. It doesn't go focus on other characters and be like, oh, well, Mike's doing this thing, and then here's another storyline involving Anne, and then we're going to go off and ditch those storylines for a little bit so we can focus on whatever Chance is doing, and then we'll go back to Mike later. It doesn't really do that. It mostly just focuses on whatever heck Mike is doing. And like I said, there's a lot going on, but it's not difficult to follow, so if you're like somebody who likes a more linear narrative, I wouldn't really call this a linear narrative, but it's easy to follow. Just trust me, it is easy to follow. So just keep that in mind. Half of the main cast is like 3 people, but then I bring this up again because I know I mentioned it earlier. I bring this up again because they make a cast with like 3 people, that like every single one of them feels completely different from the other. And I know this sounds like absolutely stupid to somebody who has no idea what I'm talking about, but if you know, you know. But it's just like how you get a cast with like a bunch of different characters that are 3 people and make them all feel like completely different characters despite the fact that they're all 3 people. It's so good. It's done so well with the character writing, the character motivations, and like just if just like, I'm speaking to Tumblr specifically for this, but if you are one of those people who keeps complaining about there not being shows with toxic gay queer rep that you are lamenting about because all the shows have to post these characters as like perfect beings because people on the internet can't understand that gay people are complex characters who are not always nice people, then you want your shitty gay protagonist. He's in the show. I love Mike. This is not me saying that I don't like Mike. I love Mike. But yeah, if you want your shitty, gay, toxic male protagonist, he is here in this show. And it's just, yes, it's so good. I also want to say, because like one of the things I like about Mike is like how complex of a character he is. Although he does come off as like kind of like at times this self-centered asshole-ish person, he's genuinely like such a great and interesting character to follow. But there's also something with the show was I love the way that this show writes relationships. One of the things that their Twitter says on their account, and I'm going to read this tweet right now, is on their pinned thread. It says, the show deals with queer and especially cis gay themes head on and from the first episode, but it's not a show about romance. It's more of a show about power, ambition, failure, hubris, death, pain, and how these color human experience. And I really enjoyed that, but I do also want to mention that there's just something really nice of the way that this show does write its romantic relationships. A lot of the main motivations with both with Mike and some other characters is the relationships with different people. Mike gets early on in a relationship with somebody named Edgar, and a lot of like his relationship with Edgar and things that are going to happen in the future but haven't happened yet, or things that are happening now, is very much motivated by Mike's relationship with Edgar and how much Mike cares about Edgar. And there's just something really nice and soft about how the way the show writes romantic relationships. As somebody who likes playing out queer rep in podcast media, like I wanted to make a big, like, specific note about this, especially since this, Mike isn't the only queer character in the show. Like, I honestly don't know if there's any straight people. Actually, wait, no, there is one specific straight character who they go like, yes, this is a straight man. But, like, I think he's like the one token cis straight friend in a group of, like, queer people, which is funny. But that's, like, one of the things I genuinely enjoy about the show is even though, like, the romance aspects of the show isn't, like, the focus, the way that they write Mike's thoughts about his romantic relationship with Edgar is just very, very nice. And it's also very nice with the other characters whose relationships they add. They also, like, go into, like, a whole topic of what happens if a future version of yourself had their partner die and then gets into a relationship with somebody else in your timeline. And it's just a very interesting take on how they write relationships, and I definitely wanted to make a point of pointing that out because another show hasn't really done that before, and I just really like how, to me, it feels soft the way that they write romantic relationships. And I feel like if you're somebody who enjoys queer relationships in media and having those portrayed, you would really enjoy the way that they go about with how they write the relationships in this show as well. I will say, though, the show does tag extreme violence and gore. I would say if you're somebody who's not really into that, but you could listen to something like the Magnus Archives, you should be fine. There is some parts with, like, some, like, visceral noises, but they're in, like, later episodes, and honestly, I feel like they, like, happens... I count the number of times it happens on, like, one hand. So it does get a bit graphic in other details in the show, like characters getting shot and dying on the screen. However, like I said, if you could deal with the Magnus Archives, you should be fine for this show. The only thing that does sometimes tag, but doesn't, is whenever there's, like, a time travel thing happening, there's this loud, like, whirring noise. It's like, woo! And sometimes it cuts in out of the blue. If you don't like really loud, sudden noises, then I suggest... I mean, it's not, like, super loud. It's not like low character talking, and then it's all of a sudden the most loud doorbell noise you've ever heard in your fucking life happening. But if you're somebody who doesn't like loud noises coming in all of a sudden, I would be advised with it, but it isn't horribly bad. It's still something that I feel like should be warned about. I believe Dylan does tag it in some episodes, but I'm not sure if he tags it in all of them. And I believe in later seasons, when they do include that noise, the noise is actually lowered down, which is nice. But it's just a little bit of a warning for people who are new to the show and aren't aware of it. But overall with this show, it's such a good piece of storytelling, especially for something that's, like, it's not quite 150 episodes yet. It's very close. It is 150 episodes almost so far. And it's done so well. The storytelling is very good paced. See, there's 12 seasons, but each season's really short. Like, my first interpretation of the show is I didn't really, I was kind of disappointed when I first listened to the show because I was just on season 1, and I'm just gonna talk about season 1, because season 1 is more focused on, like, the ARG aspects of WOE.BEGONE, whereas the rest of the story is, like, completely different tonally, completely different, like, whatever they're doing, compared to just season 1. But season 1, I wasn't really into it as much as I was hoping to be, because people were hyping this podcast up to me, and I was just like, it's alright, I guess, it's alright, but this is kind of like, something, not to say that I thought the show was bad, because I was enjoying myself listening to the show. Like, I still was like, oh, I get what's going on. Oh, I want to see what else this Mike is doing. Oh, I hope we can see more from Anne. But I wasn't like super hooked on it, like some shows where I, like, start listening to it, and I'm like, I need more of this immediately. But this is definitely one of the shows where you gotta, like, take a moment and just get a bit farther into it before it starts getting really good. Like, I started getting really, really hooked onto the story by the end of season 2. And then, like, by season 4, I was like, okay, I'm invested. I really, really am interested to know. I gotta listen to the next episode. Like, I binged through this thing. I listen to shows while I'm at work, so I was like at work, working with my dogs, and then just being like, oh, what's happening? Oh, what's happening? Ah. It's just great. It's like best thing to listen to is listening to time travel shenanigans while you're cleaning up rooms. It's great. I love it. And the show was just done so well. You just gotta give it past season 1. So if you don't find yourself super into season 1 like I was, just give it a moment. You gotta give it a little bit. And I just love, this show has done one thing that no other show has ever done, and has somehow made a character who has ended up becoming simultaneously both my most favorite and my least favorite character. And if you know, you know. I also did not say the character's name, but people on the internet or my friends probably know who it is because I went on rants about this this character so much. Goodness. Dylan just wrote a really good show. He wrote a really good show, and I really cannot wait to see what the next season brings us, because they just, like, at the time of me recording this, season 12 just ended, and season 13 is coming out next week. So I'm like sitting here, and I'm like, Dylan, what did you do? Dylan, how are you gonna fix this, Dylan? Dylan, can you? I am speaking to you through your computer, Dylan. Answer me, man. No. So yes, my overall thoughts is I love this show. The show is good. The show is great. If you love sci-fi, if you love time travel, if you love sci-fi time traveling cowboys, hello, man, time traveling cowboys. Who does not love that? If you're a fan of the Fallout New Vegas, how have you not listened to this show yet? Just saying. But anyway, yes. Overall, goodbye. This is the end of me talking about this show. I go more into the plot, but honestly, this video is gonna get so fucking long if I do. It's just, if you love, okay, so actually, if you want to know what I mean, is the show starts off like how I imagine if they took the writers of Squid Games and Dexter and put them in a room together and said write something. That's how season 1 feels. Everything after that is like if somebody decided they needed something that was like the X-Files, Men in Black, and Mission Impossible, but we had to get rid of the fucking aliens and put it all together. This is what the show feels like. It's just like a complete change in genre of it's like not genre, but like a complete change in plot, while still somehow making the original plot from season 1 remain relevant in such a nice, neatly organized way that doesn't feel out of the blue. It's done so fucking well. It's so good. So that's that. This is my pitch to you. Go listen to WOE.BEGONE. Go listen to the jokes. Go listen to it and pray to God you don't become a cowboy. Dylan Greggs couldn't get me. I played Fallout New Vegas years ago. If I wasn't a cowboy before playing Fallout New Vegas, it'll be very surprising if I wasn't a cowboy now. I'm not a cowboy. But, so overall, love the interpretation of time travel. Great piece of storytelling. Please go listen to it if you want a nice sci-fi show that dwells a little bit into horror, dwells a little bit into mystery, and overall gives you a nice, consistent plot that feels so well done and so well put together. Just go listen to it. So, goodbye. I am going to be linking to all relevant... Yeah, I do this. I say this every episode. If there is a site for WOE.BEGONE, if there is a social page for WOE.BEGONE, if Dylan Greggs got an Instagram page where he posts pictures of his various collection of cowboy hats, then I will link it. If he does not have that Instagram, I will be sad. But overall, yes, go do it. And you can follow me too. I always take podcast recommendations, so recommend me shows. I have a list. I have a whole list of shows that I am going to listen to, and shows I'm currently listening to, and shows I have listened to but haven't made videos about. So who knows? Maybe I'll listen to what you recommended. But if your show does appear on the list that I have for shows I haven't listened to yet, usually that helps me narrow down to what I'm going to listen to next. Because sometimes I just don't know, and sometimes I do know, and sometimes I'm like, what am I in the mood for? Tabletop RPG, something that's nonfiction, something that's story. What do I want? And sometimes people will be like, well, I recommend you listen to this show, Daryl. And I'm like, that's a wonderful recommendation. Thank you. I think I will listen to that next. So go ahead and do that. Go follow Dylan on his socials. Go follow me on my socials. I have social media too. I am stuck on Tumblr so much these days. And as always, thanks for listening. Goodbye. Go listen to podcasts.